I'm Anita Shalley, and I moved to Boca in 1981.
Good morning, Anita. I'm
morning.
Sandy Altner, and it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you,
and
Sandy.
I am a volunteer with the Boca Raton Historical Society and Museum. And today is July the 13th, 2016, and I thank you very much for joining us for this interview for the Jewish Oral History Project of the Historical Society. And we are conducting this interview at the fine television studios that are normally run by the students here at Lynn University in Boca Raton. So let's start with a little bit about where you grew up and how it is that you wound up to come to Boca.
Okay, well, I grew up in England. I was an evacuee during the war, and I think during that time of the war, I realized the importance of my Jewish identity, even as a little girl. And when I eventually came to Boca, I came here because my husband moved his business here. His office was near the Jewish Federation, and I started to work there, actually as a volunteer, and that evolved into a part-time job, full-time job, in fact, eventually became the director of the women's division.
Well, certainly there are very few people in Boca Raton who've been involved with Federation who don't know the name Anita Shalley. So I would like to talk. I would like to talk quite a bit about that. But give us a little bit of background first of all. We're trying to paint a picture of what it is that Jews who moved here in the late 70s and into the early 80s, which seems to have been the beginning of this start, what they found here and so on. So you and Marlon moved here from where?
We moved actually from Queens, New York. We had a home here that we used to come to for vacations. And when my husband retired, we decided it would be lovely just to move here full-time, since we had a home to live in, and that's what we did.
When did you first come to Boca then to, when you came for several years then as someone who was basically a snowbird, is that correct?
Yes, we used to come on holiday here. And I liked it very much. And as I say, when Marlon moved his business, his brother moved here. He was in business with his brother.
What business was that?
It was called the steamship chartering business. They would ship steel overseas. So when they moved here, Marlon's office was actually in the Fifth Avenue shops in Boca, and that's where there was an office of the Federation, very small. And I didn't really know much about Federation, but one day I was in the ladies' room, and I met someone who worked at Federation, and I told her, we'd moved here, I was missing my friends, so why don't you come over? Maybe you could do some part-time work. And I thought about it. I thought, it sounds interesting, being in the same building as my husband. So I did. I started out part-time, and that evolved into a 28-year career in which I eventually became the director of the women's division.
When you first came here, you and Marlon, how would you describe the Jewish community that you found here in Boca Raton?
I don't know really that we were very involved. I mean, we did go to the synagogue occasionally, and to the temple.
Which synagogue was that?
It was, it's not Bethel.
We'll fill that in later. It's
Right.
not important. But were you specifically seeking, you and Marlon, to have a Jewish community as part of your life here in Boca?
I wanted it, yes. I think I did. And so that opportunity to work at the Federation opened up all sorts of doors for me.
Let's talk about some of the initial attractions of Federation. Did you find those friends that you were looking to find?
Yes, I did, very much so, and still have them to this day. As I say, I started out doing clerical work. I didn't think I would become a career there, but then they put me in as an assistant director to the women's division, and eventually I became the director, and that lasted, I believe it's a record in Federation world for 28 years, because I loved it. I loved it because of what I was doing, raising money for those in need and for the women that I met. The lay leadership, I had wonderful lay leadership, so that was great. And then I liked my co-workers, and so it opened up a world that I never knew I could do, which was fundraising. I actually was rather successful.
I indeed would say that would be an understatement. I think that what does it take to be a successful fundraiser, do you think?
I think a few things. One, obviously, you have to believe in why you're what you're raising the money for. You have to feel very passionate about that. And then, what I found was that the lay leadership that I interacted with and worked with were wonderful women. You know, it's, if I may say, it's sort of unusual, lay professional. But I really made wonderful friends that I have today that had big positions in the women's division, the chairman of the women's division.
What were the needs that you saw in the community that were most pressing to be responded to?
Yes, well, there's so many. You know, firstly, the Federation itself supports many needs. I mean, you had family service, in which I'm trying to think of helping people I can't think of the name, special needs. Mm-hmm. I mean, the Federation helped so many different areas. So there was family service, which I liked very much. Then there was JARC, Jewish Association for Residential Care. We contributed to that. So it's through the different agencies that I saw beyond the facade of wealth in Boca. I saw the need. And so I was very happy to be doing that, and happy to be working with very dedicated people at the Federation.
Federation, yes. Federation, when, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, I believe you interviewed Helene Eichler.
Yes.
And Helene and Bruce, Rabbi Bruce Warshaw, were the execs, and they hired me, actually. So I owe it to them.
There are so many people that started off with a small piece of something,
That's right.
thinking, first, I just want to find some friends and get started.
That's true.
How did that grow for you? Once you got involved, what were the first things that you saw that there were need for? Because at that time, we didn't have much in the way of education. You mentioned JARC and so on. So there, in terms of describing what services were available when you first started in that tiny office, there really wasn't very much here, I understand.
Right. What did I see? Mm-hmm. I guess it was, really, firstly, I was in fundraising. So what was I fundraising for? And it was in Israel, which I feel strongly about. And then the needs that we saw with, say, JARC and the trappings of wealth that are here, beneath that surface, of course, there are many needs, and gradually, I guess, I learned about them. And I think also, of course, a big attraction for me was that I was with friends. I made wonderful friends there. And it was easier for me to adjust to life here after living so many years in New York. And then I started to make friends, very good friends, who I have friends even today.
When you started, had you had fundraising experience when you were working in New York or living in New York?
Right. No, I hadn't really. I didn't know I would be a good fundraiser, but I turned out to be apparently a very good fundraiser. And I think that is the reason for that. I think, obviously, to believe why I wanted to raise the money, and then the people that I met, the lay leadership, and then my colleagues that were working at Federation, their dedication affected me. And I found a whole career that I never knew I would ever have.
When we look at the way a community is shaped and the way a community grows, we've heard some marvelous stories from people about how when they first got here, there really wasn't much of a Jewish community and they sought each other out, and the difficulty in finding a challah, the difficulty in finding their way to growing the synagogues and so on. What part in that did Jewish Federation play in helping to shape the community of Boca Raton?
That's a very good question, actually. I'd have to really think about that. Well, firstly, people knew we had a federation, a place that they could come to. We had a family service, JOC, different agencies to help the needs. We had a super exec, charismatic man, Rabbi Bruce Warshall, and Helene Eichler, who you interviewed. And they were the foundation of our federation. And so just a learning process of not everybody is wealthy, and there are needs here. And they began to fill those needs. We began to fill those needs.
Why do you think Boca became a place for Jews to come?
I don't know. That's a very good question. Well, what kind of Jews are we talking about? You know,
anyone who identifies as Jewish.
Yeah. I mean, it's why Boca? Well, firstly, it's Florida and it's the weather. Boca has some wonderful synagogues. I mean, I have to think about, you know, I'd have to ask my friends why they came here, some of the lay people that I'm friendly with. What drew them initially is an excellent question.
But once the federation was established, because I think you have really hit on a very central part of this. People who were coming here were looking, perhaps first of all, to enjoy the weather, and as importantly, to feel that this was a comfortable place to come to be Jewish.
Absolutely right. That's very well put. Yeah.
Was that something that people that you met who came in who were also newcomers as you were, as you met other people who were coming, was that something that they expressed as well?
I don't know that they expressed it in those terms, but they showed it by the work that they did. I mean, apart from the people that worked at Federation, like staff, you have the lay leadership, which is a tremendous part, obviously, and I have very, very close friends who are lay leaders, and I would say the common thread is their strong Jewish identity, the feeling of community that they needed here.
And to build a community.
Exactly, and Federation gave them that opportunity. So they became chairmen and, leaders in the community.
Do you think that women have been underrepresented in the recognition of their contribution to how the Jewish community grew in Boca Raton?
I don't know. I don't know how to answer that.
I'm just thinking in terms of how, when we look back in history, we always see that the men get so much glory.
Right.
And you're talking really about an army of women that was behind the scenes that wasn't looking for recognition necessarily.
Right. That's true, because as I was the women's division, that's all I obviously I saw the men, but the women were a tremendous force.
Do you hear women say, "I'm just a volunteer"?
I don't think I've heard them say I'm just a volunteer.
Good.
But they are volunteers.
Good, because I think that so many people give of themselves so selflessly, as the many people that you're describing that have worked with you.
Right.
When they came in, and these women clearly had many ideas
That's
and many skills to bring to the shaping of Federation, how did you find that it shaped from that time when you first started? What were the substantial changes that you could describe the growth of how, like, what kinds of needs were they responding to that allowed it to reach further and deeper into the community, to gather more people and more resources?
Well, I think that, first of all, people came, I'm thinking of the lay people that I know and became friendly with. They first were attracted to Federation because of the home, of being Jewish. And then the needs, finding out JARC, Jewish Association for Residential Care, the different needs, I guess, and it fulfilled within them what they wanted. I mean, many of them, and I remember it was women that I dealt with, had been involved in the North with Hadassah. A lot of them were Hadassah members. And so for them it was natural to navigate perhaps to the Federation. And in the women's division, they became chairman. They really had hands-on work to do that fulfilled them.
Certainly one of the largest projects was the development of the Jewish Association for Residential Care, which I believe is about 25 years old now.
Right.
And an incredible organization that stands alone in the country for what it is able to provide in the way of services. How did that idea come about? Because if I were to describe JARC briefly, it would be as the most gentle and caring and inspiring home for people who have needs that are being met, not just by the people who work there, but by their their co-members of their little family units, as well as the work that they have an opportunity to do to interact with the community. Is that a fair assessment?
I think that's wonderful. Have you interviewed the director?
Yes, I'm very familiar with
Debbie.
JARC. Mm-hmm.
Oh,
yes,
okay.
and
So
Dr.
Debbie,
Hallow does a wonderful Dr. Deborah Hallow and her team are extraordinary people.
Right. So Deborah would answer you best about JARC. I mean, it is a wonderful agency, and many of the lay leadership, are attracted to JARC, the women especially, I would say, I think. But it is. I mean, at Federation you have JARC, you have the school, Donna Klein. So it's really a remarkable federation, I think.
At the beginning, too, when the Jewish community was first becoming established here, and we've talked to some of the volunteers who've worked so hard to make sure that education was taken care of, that there was going to be a proper outlet for parents who wanted to make sure that their children were educated in that way. And that dedication seems to have spread beyond the Jewish parochial schools into the entire community. Would you say it has?
I think that's true. Yes, I think, when I started at Federation, when I think about it now, as I said, we were above a lingerie store in the Fifth Avenue shops. Bruce, Rabbi Borschel, Helene, myself, I didn't come in as a director. I came in as a part-time clerical help. And a small staff. And when I think of how that's grown and what they've achieved with the different agencies, with JARC, with the Donna Klein, and the JCC, a place now that attracts so many different people. I mean, it's amazing. And I think Rabbi Warshall was a genius, and that the combination of Helene and Bruce really was the catalyst that everything started from there. And then they were able to draw in people that became very dedicated from a small staff, and then it grew and grew.
It's an interesting perspective that you have, I think, too, because when we look at how there are many, many challenges that have faced the Jewish community, not the least of which is anti-Semitism, but when you have a strong enough community, there seems to be a way to inspire tolerance, if I would say it that way.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah, that's excellent.
Do you feel
that
that's
something?
True?
Yes, I think that's excellent, yes.
Do you think that the Federation was able to inspire that tolerance with the work it did?
I definitely think so. I think, has a wonderful reputation now, and yes, and from a beginning of, as I said, very, very small beginnings, as most things are that eventually grow. They grow from small beginnings.
Another issue I think that we concern ourselves with as Jews is, well, there are many, many things, but just the survival of the Jews at the base of it all. That people are becoming not always as interested in their Judaism as the generations go by. How does Federation respond to helping Jews understand the importance of Judaism?
I'm not sure how to answer that. I think that if you're working there, it's obvious then you have some kind of feeling for Judaism. I know I certainly do and did, since I grew up as a child and evacuee during the Second World War. So I know about anti-Semitism, I know about bombs being our house destroyed, I know about those things. And I know also a lot about anti-Semitism because of my, as I say, being evacuated. And I don't know if I should go into that.
Yes, I would like to hear more about that, because I think that your experience really informed
myself,
who you became, and then how you brought your special sense of Judaism to South Florida with that. So what?
Well, when I was evacuated, my father was in the army. Our home was actually destroyed, it was bombed, and my mother went to live with her parents in the West End of London, and I was an evacuee.
At what age?
I think I was 8 when the war broke out. So I was first evacuated with my school and placed in a home, a family. And then I was taken, why I don't know, frankly. I was taken from one family to another family. And eventually my father was in the army. He came to see me, and I was with a family that had taken everything that my parents had sent me, like whatever it was, for themselves. So he took me away from there, and I stayed for a couple of years in a boys' home, all boys but me. I was too young to enjoy it. But these were a group of boys that had been taken out of Germany. I don't know if they'd been in a home or how the Rabbi Marx, his name was, brought them out. He brought all these boys out from Germany. And I stayed there for a while. And then I was taken from there to a girls' home, as I say, during the war, a Jewish girls' home. And stayed there until near the end of the war, when my parents were able, as I say, my father was in the army, and they were able to bring me back.
Why were you not able to stay with your mother?
Well, because we were in London and in the Blitz. You know, I can remember them bringing me home when my father came home on leave, and we would set the alarm clock for a certain time because the Germans would bomb at a certain hour every night. I guess that's a kind of psychological thing that is, but obviously it was, that they bombed at the same time. So my parents would set the alarm clock, and up we'd get and dress if my father was there from the army, and go down to a shelter, which I believe was an underground garage. And then eventually the sirens would sound, and we'd go back out. But our actual home was bombed. So as I say, my mother was living with her parents in the West End of London. And I was sent away for my safety because of the bombing. So I had many experiences, and I always think that my success at Federation had something to do with the fact that I had to learn as a child to get along with all sorts of people that I didn't know. And I happened to be very outgoing and love people, so I learned at a young age about getting along. And I think those skills, even from a child, transferred to when I started working at Federation. And I found wonderful friends, not only in staff, but with the lay leadership.
What happened after the war? Were you reunited with your family?
My parents, yes, I was. I think my father brought me back maybe before the war ended. Maybe the bombings had stopped, had lessened. And I came back. And I lived and worked in London, and then when I was older, and eventually I went to work in Paris for NATO. And from NATO, I lived there for 3 years. I worked for NATO for 3 years. And I decided I would love to make a trip to America before I settled down. So I had family here, and I came to America and met my husband.
Where?
Yes. Where did we meet?
Mm-hmm.
We had met at a party years ago, actually. I was on a trip. And then when I came back, he was told I was back, and he contacted me.
What city was that?
It was New York.
Had you come directly to New York then from England?
Yes, well, I came to Long Island to cousins of my father, and then eventually found work in Manhattan, and sort of evolved from that.
So did it take very long for romance to blossom and for you to
A year, yes, right. So, and
so then
I thank God.
yes, indeed. And did you then raise your family in New York before you moved here?
I did. We did in Queens, New York. Yes, a boy and a girl.
With that background, Anita, it just makes me think that you yourself, first of all, you're a woman of great strength, and there's a positivity in you that I think would consistently bubble to the surface. And I would imagine that those years ago you had that.
Well, thank you.
So when you came in and people would complain about this or that, you probably had a slightly different perspective on what needed to be complained about and what ought not be complained about.
Right. Sounds right. Yeah. I know with other directors in the field, it's a difficult job, but I don't know, I loved it. I was very fortunate with my lay leadership. I just, they became friends. Some of them are very close friends now.
There's a determination, I think, too, that comes with each of those individuals that you worked with, the lay leadership working so well with you in some of these projects. Where did the ideas come from? Where did the let's create this or that project come from?
Right. I think it was a collaboration between the chairman and myself. As I say, we raised a lot of money. We had wonderful events. I was able to get speakers, wonderful speakers. I don't want to be boastful, but I discovered I had a talent, which I never knew. I had a talent for running huge events. My daughter came to one, she couldn't believe it. And I had a talent for that and for getting the right speaker for the right crowd. And then the relationships that I was able to form with the women was the backbone of everything. And so I must say, very successful. Our women's division was very, very successful, and I believe it's continuing now. So I'm happy.
Let's talk about some of the projects that you found to be most gratifying. We talked about JARC and raising money to create the Jewish Association for Residential Care, which, as we mentioned, is just a fantastic place. Now, there are other things that have happened as well. Is there anything that stands out that you would like to tell me about?
Well, the different agencies, certainly JARC is premier, but I like family service very much. I became very, very friendly, and still are, with the director at that time. Was a man named Spencer Gellert. I don't know if you've heard of Spencer, but he and I and his wife and Marlon, we became very close friends. But I liked very much the work of family service, of people that were in trouble and for one reason or another were able to go there. So I would say that I saw the different agencies and what Federation was doing. It was, not just any ordinary job. And I very much like my colleagues there. And as I say, the women, I don't know, maybe it was my British accent, but, I'd heard, I'm going to have a terrible time, women, leadership, blah, 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 blah. Instead of that, I found it wonderful. I mean, as I said, I have friends today that I still see that were chairman of the women's division.
There were some unusual projects that came along as well. Barry and Susan Podolsky were interviewed by us as well, and they talked about the tremendous response in Boca Raton to the resettlement of the Russian Jews,
yes.
the Soviet Jews. Can you tell me a little bit about that project?
Not really, just that I know that was so. Yes, yes. So the Podolskys, that's nice.
Is this the kind of community that you, if you needed something and you called someone, would you have a pretty good sense that they're going to help you out?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's a wonderful question. Wonderful, because that gets to the heart of it. Yes. I could, if God forbid I needed anything, from many people I could pick up the phone and call. Yeah. So I guess being Jewish, you have a bond, and our history, unspoken history, bonds us in a way, and yes, one can call on them.
What part of the history of the Jewish people is being written here in Boca Raton?
Well, it's a different part of history, I feel. I mean, it's a successful part, isn't it? Because they were, affluence. But places like the Federation and JOC and Family Service, they're also playing a big part too. That not everybody that's here is wealthy or able to cope with life, and the Federation is here to help them.
How has philanthropy shaped the Jewish community here in Boca Raton, or the overall community, really? Particularly the philanthropy from the Jewish community.
I don't know how to answer that. In general, I'm not sure. I think that one of the things, which is not the philanthropy, but perhaps to do with anti-Semitism, I think perhaps the Jewish Federation, the people that work there and the work that is done, it has been able to diffuse that with the non-Jewish community. I don't know.
How has that happened? How have you seen that happen with the efforts of
the Federation?
Mm-hmm.
I guess because, it's not when it started, but it grew so that I'm, of course I have a lot of friends who are not Jewish. They know all about Federation. I don't know, somehow it seeps through the community in ways that perhaps we don't even realize. Education.
An education clearly that extends beyond what the Jewish community is, but
Exactly.
educating the larger community.
Exactly.
Right. Do you still see challenges in Boca that you would like to see met?
Well, I don't know. I live a very cloistered life now, I think. I don't know.
When we look at the many, many contributions that were made by so many different individuals, people who stuffed envelopes, made telephone calls,
Correct.
ran events, arranged flowers, and brought their friends and persuaded their friends to support new events, new programs. In all of that, I'd like to ask you, what is it that Federation has done that you are most proud of?
I think maybe the agencies. JOC, people with special needs, the school, Jewish Education, Donna Klein, and my favorite, Family Service. And people who have problems, and then they've resettled Jewish families, Jewish Russian families that have come here. I know that JOC no, family service has been involved with that. So I guess it's a central address for the Jewish people here, that with all different needs, whatever they are, there is a central address you can go to, and you will be helped.
With the many changes that you've seen in Boca Raton over all of these years, and with the concern that we have, I think many people, for whether Boca is a place for young people and whether young people will be attracted to staying in Boca, what can you tell me about young people and the future of Boca Raton? Will Jewish young people settle here?
Well, certainly in Federation, there was a strong community of young leadership. They sent their children to Donakine to get a Jewish education, and they became involved. We're in the synagogues. I think they're very active young people. So I think that I think Federation, that used to draw maybe from the much more older population, is now drawing more from the younger, which is, I think, is right. Yeah. I can think of a number of women, young women, who devote themselves to perpetuating the Jewish life here.
Do you think that people here who have been here for since the 70s and 80s and now have grown children and grandchildren, do you think those grandchildren will end up staying in Boca Raton?
That's a good question, as they all are that you're asking. I don't think so. I don't know. I mean, I can't see. I mean, I'm thinking of my daughter, and I have a grandson, and I don't think that this area would interest them, really. It's, you know.
But within certain communities, we're seeing, I'm thinking about the Orthodox community has shown tremendous growth.
Yes, it has.
And we're
That's
seeing
true.
Families coming and staying.
I think with the Orthodox community, then that's a good point.
Why is this so attractive to the Orthodox community to come here?
The weather. I don't know.
It is the weather.
If you
But there's a strong community. Like one of the earlier questions, she says, "What kind of Jew?"
Yeah.
So I ask you that question too. Like what does the Jewish community look like here?
Right.
It's many different kinds of
It
Jews,
is,
isn't it?
It is. Absolutely right. Yes, there is a very strong Orthodox community here. I guess they've found their community. I mean, everybody, I think, looks for a feeling of communal life, of like-minded ideas, and they're comfortable, and the Orthodox have that.
Would you say that today, regardless of what flavor of Judaism touches someone's life, would you say that Boca Raton is a great place to be?
If you're Jewish, or?
Yes.
I don't know. That's another wonderful question. Is it a great place to be if you're Jewish? I don't know, really. I mean, I think Boca gives to everyone, Jewish or non-Jewish. Obviously, it gives you the weather, a very easy lifestyle, and you're able to be in communities, like-minded communities, in country clubs, where perhaps if you're Orthodox, you feel more comfortable in your enclave, in your community. I think the country clubs, which is a big life here, is what gives people a sense of belonging. So you have the wonderful weather, and you're living in a community or with friends of like-minded, and I guess you feel safe, I imagine. I don't live in a community like that. I wish we did, but when we first came here, we would come on holiday, and I didn't realize about the areas at the time. Yeah. But I've made my friends anyway.
I have one last question for you. When you think back to those very difficult and terrifying times when you were a little girl in England, and what you felt then, and what you feel now about being in Boca Raton, how has your life turned out?
Yes, well, firstly about being that little girl who went to live with strangers and had all sorts of experiences, mainly good. I lived with Jewish people, Jewish homes for children who'd either lost their parents. And I always had my parents visiting my father, you know. So what was the rest of it?
From that little girl with those difficulties to now, what is your life? How did that little girl grow up?
Very happily, thank you, God. Yes, very happily, because I'm very gregarious, and I have a lot of good friends. I came to America and I found the love of my life, so what could be better than that, right? And go through the normal ups and downs that everybody goes through in life. But we have lovely children, thank God, and I am very grateful for the years at Federation and the understanding that I got there. So, happy. Thank you.
Wonderful.
God.
Well, thank you very much, and I do appreciate your sharing your stories with us, Anita.
You're very empathetic.
Oh.
You're a wonderful interviewer.
Well, thank you.
I hope, is that on? It should be on the tape. Keep it on the tape. She's a wonderful interviewer.
Well, thank you, and thank you also for all of the work you did and all of the leadership that you brought to our community, and the very clear stamp you have put on the Jewish community in Boca Raton, because I think it's so greatly appreciated by so many people. So thank you on behalf of all of us here.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.